What? How is this even possible? That's all Jack Miller could say when he saw it. His twin boys, who hadn't walked in years, standing, balancing, smiling. He thought he was dreaming. But this wasn't a dream. This was real. And it was happening in the middle of his living room. The same boys every doctor had given up on were now on their feet, and the woman standing in front of them, not a neurologist, not a therapist, just the maid he hired to mop the floor. She wasn't following a protocol. She was playing music, waving napkins, laughing. And somehow, it worked. Jack Miller had everything. Private jets, sky-high penthouses, a name that moved markets. But no amount of power could fix what was broken. After the crash that killed his wife and paralyzed their sons, Jack disappeared into work. Grief turned to silence, and silence turned into something worse. Acceptance. Dozens of experts tried. All failed. Then came Gloria Gibson. No clipboard, no credentials. Just a steady presence and a voice that filled the room with soul. Jack barely noticed her until the day he saw the impossible. But before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. I hope this video makes you believe kindness comes from the heart. The silence didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, through the hospital walls, through the funeral, through the long ride home with 2 small wheelchairs and no car seat in the back. After the crash, Jack Miller stopped asking questions. He paid, scheduled, nodded. But nothing reached him. He lived 50 floors above the noise of Chicago, in a glass fortress where sunlight poured in but warmth never stayed. His sons, once wild with energy, now stared out windows like statues. Their laughter, gone. Their voices, rare. 2 years. That's how long it had been since Charles and Stephen had taken a step. That's how long Jack had been chasing solutions, with money, credentials, titles. If someone claimed they could help, Jack flew them in. No questions, no limits. But they all left. Some too proud to admit failure. Others too overwhelmed by the weight of a home frozen in grief. He buried himself in meetings, in flight plans, code reviews, quarterly earnings. The more the house hollowed, the busier he became. And then Gloria arrived. She didn't have a business card, didn't bring binders or charts, just a canvas bag, a kind smile, and a voice that sounded like it carried history. Jack barely glanced at her on the first day. She was the maid, that's all. She didn't ask for therapy notes, didn't mention the boy's condition. She just looked around the penthouse and asked softly, "What do they like?" Jack blinked. No one had asked that, not once. Most walked in and asked about muscle tone, range of motion, charts. But Gloria? She wanted to know what made them laugh. That evening, she hummed as she cleaned. Not pop songs, not lullabies. Something deeper, low, rich notes that filled the walls like light through cracked shutters. From the hallway, Jack paused. He heard it, soft clapping, a giggle, a sound he hadn't heard in months. He leaned closer. Stephen was grinning. Charles tapped a napkin to his knee, mimicking a rhythm only they understood. Gloria never looked up. She kept swaying, singing gently, like she'd known them all her life. Jack's hand gripped the doorframe. Something stirred in his chest, faint, unfamiliar. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was something. And that something wouldn't let him look away. The second morning, Gloria didn't knock. She moved through the penthouse like she belonged there, not as a guest, not as staff, but like someone who knew how to bring warmth into cold spaces. Jack was on a call, pacing near the kitchen, when he heard it again. Not speech, not small talk. Music, low, slow, not meant for show. He followed the sound down the hall and stopped just outside the boys' playroom. There she was, sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by dust rags, folded laundry, and 2 wide-eyed boys. She wasn't giving instructions. She wasn't asking questions. She was singing, not a nursery rhyme, not a clean-up song. It was gospel, a deep, honey-rich melody that settled into the room like sunlight on still water. Her hands moved with the rhythm, graceful, sure, floating bright napkins like kites in slow motion. Stephen followed one with his eyes, mesmerized. Charles reached out and caught one, laughing as it fluttered down. Jack's breath caught. Stephen hadn't laughed in months, not once. Gloria leaned closer, never breaking the rhythm. She wasn't pushing, she was inviting, like she was speaking their language, the one no doctor ever learned. Jack stepped back before she saw him. Later, in the kitchen, he waited until she set down the mop bucket. "You're not a therapist," he said, more accusation than question. Gloria dried her hands on her apron and looked at him, calm as ever. "No, sir," she replied. He folded his arms. "Then what is this? The singing, the napkins? That's not part of any treatment plan I've paid for." She held his gaze unwavering. "Maybe they don't need a plan," she said softly. "Maybe they just need someone to see them." Jack didn't respond. Not because he disagreed, but because for the first time he couldn't think of anything to say. That night he stood outside the playroom again. The lights were dim, Gloria was packing up. As she turned to leave, she paused beside him. "I know what it's like," she said quietly, "to lose the sound of joy in a home. But it doesn't disappear, it just hides." Then she walked past him, humming, and in the room behind her, the boys kept smiling. By the third day, Gloria had stopped asking permission. She moved through the penthouse like music itself, light, unexpected but impossible to ignore. She didn't wait for instructions. She listened, not to schedules or checklists, but to the quiet hum beneath the silence, the twitch of a foot, the shift in breath, the way Stephen's eyes followed movement like a secret he couldn't say out loud. She dusted the bookshelves with a dish towel that she tied like a superhero cape. Charles grinned. Stephen held out his arms. "Flying time?" she asked. They nodded. In minutes, the playroom transformed. Pillows became mountains. Napkins became treasure maps. The boys, once slouched in stillness, leaned forward, engaged, alert, alive. Jack watched from the hallway, arms crossed, unsure of what he was even witnessing. There was no protocol here, no measured progress, just Gloria, twirling through the room with two giggling shadows at her heels. She turned to the boys and whispered like she was letting them in on a secret. "Did you know your legs aren't broken? They're just sleeping, and sometimes a little joy can wake them up." Stephen tapped his foot. Charles clapped twice, tiny movements, but intentional. Jack blinked. He almost missed it. Later that afternoon, Gloria emerged from the room, wiping her forehead with a napkin. He stopped her. "You're turning my house into a circus," he said flatly. She looked at him, calm. "It's not a circus, Mr. Miller, it's childhood. You're not here to play games." "No," she agreed. "I'm here to find out what makes them laugh." That sentence echoed long after she walked away, because the truth, the brutal, quiet truth, was that Jack couldn't answer that question. He didn't know what made his sons laugh anymore. He knew their prescriptions. He knew the names of every specialist who had failed them. He knew the weight of their wheelchairs, down to the ounce. But laughter, that was something he'd stopped expecting. That night, Jack didn't bury himself in work. He stood outside their room, silent. Inside, Gloria held up a mirror and pointed. "Look," she told Stephen, "that's a strong boy right there." Then to Charles, "And that smile? That's better than any medicine." They giggled. Jack closed his eyes. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't heavy. It was full. Jack wasn't supposed to come home early. A last-minute meeting had been cancelled, and for once he didn't fill the space with another. Something, he couldn't name it, pulled him home. The elevator doors opened into silence, but not the kind he was used to. This was different. It felt full. He loosened his tie, stepped into the hallway, and heard it. Laughter. Not canned TV sound, not Gloria's voice. This was his son's, real, loud, joyful. He followed it slowly, like chasing a sound from a forgotten dream. And when he reached the living room, he froze. Gloria stood in the center of the room, arms raised, two blue napkins fluttering from her hands like flags. Stephen and Charles stood with her, on the coffee table, on their feet, wobbling, balancing, standing. Charles waved one napkin in sync with Gloria. Stephen was laughing so hard he nearly toppled forward, but Gloria caught his hand just in time. Jack's briefcase slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. No one turned. They were too caught up in the moment. He took a step forward. Charles saw him first. "Look, Papa!" he shouted, breathless. "We're standing!" Jack didn't move. He didn't breathe. This was impossible. These were the same legs that specialists said would never bear weight. The same boys who couldn't hold themselves upright in physical therapy last week. And now, they were dancing. Not perfectly, not for long, but unmistakably, undeniably standing. Gloria finally turned. Her smile didn't falter. She didn't explain. She didn't apologize. She just said softly, "They're stronger than you think." Jack sat down, hard. He didn't trust his knees. His heart was pounding like it had just remembered how. He stared at the boys, red-faced, glowing, triumphant, and something cracked open inside him. Hope. The real kind. Not the kind you write checks for, but the kind that grabs you by the throat and refuses to let go. That night Jack didn't work. He didn't check his phone. He didn't speak much at all. He just sat on the edge of his bed, staring out at the city, replaying the image over and over. 2 boys, 1 woman, a coffee table, and the moment everything changed, Jack barely slept. He couldn't stop replaying it. Charles laughing, Stephen balancing, Gloria clapping like it was the most normal thing in the world. But it wasn't normal. It defied everything he'd been told, everything he'd prepared himself to accept. By morning, awe had given way to something else. Fear. What if it wasn't real? What if it was a fluke, a moment that would never happen again? He needed certainty, something clinical, something cold. So he called Dr. Peterson. Peterson had seen the twins since the accident. A respected neurologist, measured, blunt. Jack trusted him because he never offered false hope. "I need you to come by the house," Jack said, keeping his voice even. "Are they okay?" "They stood," Jack answered. "With my own eyes, I saw them stand." There was a long pause. "I'll be there at 3. Jack didn't tell Gloria. When Peterson arrived, he stepped into the living room like a man entering a lab. No emotion, just analysis. Gloria was already mid-game. Scarves swirled through the air. Music played softly. The twins clapped along, beaming, but something shifted. Stephen caught sight of Peterson standing in the corner. His shoulders stiffened. Charles looked over too, then stopped moving. The room dimmed, not physically, but emotionally. Whatever light Gloria had lit was flickering now. She noticed. Of course she did. Her smile faltered. Her rhythm slowed. The twins grew quiet. Peterson stood, arms crossed, saying nothing. He scribbled a few notes, watched, judged, left. He didn't speak to Gloria, just nodded at Jack and walked out the front door. Jack followed him to the elevator. "Well?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Peterson glanced at his notes. "It's not sustainable," he said. "Reflexes can mimic progress. You may have witnessed a motor response, not actual recovery." Jack clenched his jaw. "You didn't see how they—" "I saw hesitation, fatigue, emotional reliance on unstructured stimuli." Then a beat. "Be careful what you let them believe." The elevator doors slid shut. Jack stood alone in the hallway. "Be careful what you let them believe." The words echoed louder than the boys' laughter had the day before. Inside, he heard Gloria's voice again, gentle, melodic, still trying. But doubt had taken hold, and this time, it wasn't going to leave quietly. He didn't sleep. Again. The doctor's words looped in his head like static. Reflexes, not sustainable. Emotional reliance. Be careful what you let them believe. By morning, Jack wasn't just tired. He was angry. At himself. At the doctor. At how quickly he'd allowed hope to take root. He found Gloria in the kitchen, humming while rinsing dishes. The boys were in the other room, laughing at something she'd said. "Did you know Dr. Peterson came by yesterday?" Jack asked. She didn't turn. "I saw him." Jack stepped forward. "Then you know what he said." Gloria dried her hands, set the towel down, and finally faced him. "I don't need to hear it. I saw what I saw." He scoffed. "You think you saw progress, but you're not trained to know the difference between therapy and theatrics." Her jaw tightened. "And you think degrees are what your boys need most?" Jack's voice rose before he could stop it. "They're my sons, Gloria, not some project for you to experiment on between chores." That one landed. For a moment she said nothing, then, "I'm not experimenting, Jack. I'm connecting. Something no one else here has even tried." "You made me look like a fool," he snapped. For 1 second, I believed maybe things were changing, but all I saw was you putting on a show." Her eyes didn't waver. "Are you more afraid of false hope, or the possibility that something real is happening, and it didn't come from you?" Silence. "You don't know what it's like," he muttered, softer now, "to watch your children disappear into stillness, to be told over and over again there's nothing left to try." Gloria took a step closer. "You're right. I haven't lived your pain, but I do know what it means to keep showing up anyway." Jack looked away. "I didn't ask you to give them hope," he said. "No," she replied. "You asked me to clean your floors. And maybe that's all you thought they needed." He shook his head, turning to leave. "Be careful," she said quietly, "how quickly you dismiss joy just because it wasn't prescribed." Later that night, Jack sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the city lights, trying to convince himself he was right. Then came a knock. Charles stood in the doorway, blanket in hand, eyes sleepy but clear. "I like Miss Gloria," he said softly. "She makes my legs feel magic." Jack didn't answer. Couldn't. He simply watched his son turn and shuffle back down the hall, feet dragging, legs shaky but moving. And for the first time in days, Jack didn't feel angry. He felt something else, the slow, brutal pull of guilt. The next morning, Jack stayed quiet. He didn't apologize, didn't bring up the fight, but he didn't interfere either. From the hallway, he watched Gloria enter the playroom with the same gentle rhythm. No bitterness in her voice, no shift in her spirit, just presence. Stephen was quieter than usual. Charles sat beside him, concerned. "Want to try something new today?" Gloria asked, crouching beside them. Stephen hesitated. His eyes flicked toward the door. Jack pulled back, out of sight. Gloria placed a small stack of blocks on the edge of a low table. "Here's the game," she whispered. "You're a tower builder. But this table, it's the edge of the world. Think you can reach it?" Stephen looked at her, unsure. She leaned in closer. "I'll be right here, but I won't catch you. You don't need me to." She stepped back. The room went still. Stephen placed both hands on the seat of his chair, pushed once. His legs trembled, nothing moved. He tried again. This time his knees locked, briefly. His face tightened with focus. He pushed harder, and then, slowly, shakily, he rose, half standing, wobbling, every muscle in his body fighting to hold. He reached out, grabbed a block. "I'm doing it," he gasped. Gloria didn't rush in. She didn't clap. She just smiled. "You are." Jack stepped into the doorway, barely breathing. Stephen turned his head. "Papa," he whispered, voice trembling. "I'm standing by myself." Jack's throat tightened. He moved forward, dropped to one knee beside him, steadying only with his voice. "You are, buddy. You really are." Stephen smiled, proud and exhausted, and slowly lowered himself back into his chair. Jack looked up at Gloria. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. Her hand rested gently over her heart, her eyes shimmering, but steady. Jack sat there for a while, one hand on his son's shoulder, the other on the table's edge. He didn't say thank you, not yet. But the look he gave her, it said everything. The days that followed felt different. There was no grand announcement, no sudden shift. But something had opened, and Jack could feel it. Stephen smiled more. Charles asked questions. The silence in the penthouse no longer swallowed sound. It carried it. Gloria kept showing up with her bag of napkins and mismatched scarves. She still played music, still danced through the routines like joy was a language only the boys truly understood. But now, Jack watched with something new in his chest. Not fear, not doubt, wonder. And slowly, without being asked, he began to join them. At first, just clapping, then humming along. Then one morning, Charles held out a scarf. "You try, Papa." Jack took it, awkward at first, but then Gloria spun beside them, blue napkins floating in the air, and Jack Miller, the man who hadn't laughed in years, started waving his scarf in the air like a child. And he laughed, loud, free. His sons burst out laughing too. It became their new morning ritual. Music, movement, no rules, no reports, just rhythm, trust, and hope. Then came the moment. It happened on a Thursday. The light in the living room was golden, soft. Gloria laid out a small row of pillows across the rug. She didn't say much, just turned on the music and sat nearby. Charles stood beside the couch, one hand
Jack was
resting
about to
lightly
say
on the
something,
armrest.
ask if he needed help, but stopped.
Charles looked at his brother, then at Gloria. Then he took one shaky step, then another, and then he let go. He walked, wobbly, unsure, but real, straight across the room, into Gloria's arms. She caught him not because he was falling, but because she knew how much it meant to arrive. Jack froze. Charles turned back, smiling. "I walked, Papa," he said through a laugh. Jack dropped to his knees, overcome. Tears spilled before he could catch them. Stephen clapped wildly. Gloria laughed softly, still holding Charles. Then Stephen stood. "I want to try," he said. And he did. They both walked that day. Not far, not fast, but together. Jack didn't call a doctor. He didn't reach for a chart. He just sat on the floor, arms open, and let his sons collapse into him, giggling, breathless, alive. Gloria knelt beside them, one hand on Jack's back. "They always had it in them," she whispered. "They just needed someone to believe." Jack looked at her. "I didn't know how," he said. "You do now." The penthouse didn't feel like glass and steel anymore. It breathed. Laughter echoed through the hallways. Music spilled from the playroom. And Jack Miller, once the man who lived for silence, found himself waking up early, just to hear the sound of his sons chasing each other through the kitchen. They weren't running yet, not fully, but they moved freely, joyfully. Every step was a miracle dressed as progress, and Jack was no longer watching from the sidelines. He was part of it. He clapped during morning games. He helped with the scarf dances. He even learned how to fold towels the way Gloria liked, just so he could stay in the room longer. Work still called, but it didn't own him anymore. For the first time in years, he chose breakfast over boardrooms, school drop-offs over status calls, because what Gloria gave them wasn't just healing, it was permission to live, to hope, to believe in something that couldn't be bought. One afternoon, Jack sat across from her at the dining table, the boys building towers nearby. "I want you to stay," he said, "not just as staff, as family." Gloria smiled, but shook her head gently. "I was never here for the job." Jack frowned. "Then why?" She looked over at Charles and Stephen. "They were the reason. That's always been enough." Silence hung between them, but not the heavy kind. This one was full, earned. Before she left that evening, Jack walked her to the door. "Thank you," he said, voice low. Gloria touched his arm. "You don't need to thank me. You just need to keep going." And he did. Weeks turned into months. The twins grew stronger, bolder. They ran down hallways with reckless delight, Jack chasing behind them, breathless and laughing like a man who'd been given his life back. People stared when they passed through the park together. This billionaire father, arms out, pretending to be a spaceship while his sons zoomed ahead. Jack didn't care. This was the kind of wealth no one could measure, not in numbers, not in titles, just moments, moments that Gloria had made possible. And on one quiet evening, as Charles and Stephen sprinted ahead, voices echoing, scarves trailing behind like capes. Jack stood in the doorway watching them disappear down the hall. He didn't call out, didn't tell them to slow down. He just smiled. Because for the first time in forever, Jack Miller wasn't running from grief.
If this story stirred something in you,
a memory, a feeling, or even just a moment of stillness, don't leave quietly. At Elevated Heart Stories, we share real moments that move hearts and open eyes. So take a second to subscribe, like this video, and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Because your voice might be the light someone else is waiting for. Until next time, stay kind, stay human, and keep your heart elevated.